Elena Hartwell opened a sealed door in her basement. What she found behind it hadn't been touched since 1942. And what started as a simple home renovation would uncover a conspiracy that had been buried for over 80 years, one that connected directly to her own bloodline. The Victorian house on Wisteria Lane had stood empty for nearly 2 years before Elena Hartwell finally gathered the courage to move in. Her Aunt Josephine had left it to her in the will, a sprawling 3-story structure with gabled windows and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. At 31, Elena was starting over, a failed marriage behind her, a stalled career as an investigative journalist, and a bank account that made her wince every time she checked it. The house was both a gift and a burden, a place filled with childhood memories and the ghost of a woman she had loved but never fully understood. She had visited Aunt Josephine here countless times as a child, running through the halls, playing hide-and-seek in the endless rooms. But always, she had been forbidden from going into the basement. "Nothing down there but spiders and old junk," her aunt would say, her voice sharp with a finality that discouraged questions. Elena had obeyed then. She was 31 now, and Aunt Josephine was 6 months in the ground. The basement door creaked when she opened it for the first time as the owner. The smell that rolled up the stairs was exactly what she expected: mildew, dust, and the particular mustiness of a space that had been closed off from fresh air for decades. Elena descended slowly, her phone's flashlight cutting a pale beam through the darkness. The stairs groaned under her weight, each step announcing her presence to whatever lay below. The basement was larger than she remembered. Or perhaps she had simply been smaller then, and everything had seemed vast. Now, standing at the bottom of the stairs, she could see it was massive, stretching the full length of the house above, maybe 40 feet long and 30 feet wide. The ceiling was low, barely 6.5 feet, crossed with exposed wooden beams that sagged slightly in the middle. The walls were old brick, the kind laid by hand over a century ago, and the floor was poured concrete, cracked and uneven with age. Elena moved through the space slowly, cataloging what needed to be done. The furnace in the corner looked like it belonged in a museum. Cardboard boxes were stacked against one wall, their contents long ago claimed by moisture and time. A workbench sat beneath a grimy window set high in the wall, its surface covered with tools that had rusted into abstract sculptures. She was measuring the space with a tape measure, planning where she might install proper lighting and storage, when her foot caught on something. She stumbled, barely catching herself against the wall, and looked down to see what had tripped her. A metal ring, flush with the floor, almost invisible beneath years of grime and a thin layer of concrete dust. She crouched and brushed it clean, revealing a handle. A trapdoor? No, the ring was attached to the wall, not the floor. Elena ran her fingers along the brick, and that's when she felt it. A seam. Barely perceptible, hidden in the mortar line, but definitely there. She pressed against the bricks, and they gave slightly, almost imperceptibly. Her heart began to beat faster. She pressed harder, and heard a soft grinding sound, brick against brick, something shifting behind the wall. She went upstairs and returned with a hammer, a chisel, and a growing sense that she was about to discover why Aunt Josephine had spent 50 years warning people away from this basement. The first brick came loose with surprising ease, as if it had never been properly mortared into place. Then another. Then 3 more. Behind them was not more brick, but wood. A door. Heavy, old wood, swollen with decades of moisture, with an iron handle that had oxidized to a dull orange-brown. There was no lock. Just a simple latch, rusted but functional. Elena's hand hovered over it for a long moment. Every instinct told her that opening this door would change something fundamental. That once she crossed this threshold, there would be no going back to the comfortable ignorance of not knowing. She pulled the latch. The door resisted at first, though it swollen tight in its frame. She had to brace her foot against the wall and pull with both hands before it finally gave way with a tortured shriek of wood against wood. The smell that rolled out made her gag, not decay exactly, but something worse. The smell of time itself, of air that had been trapped and stagnant for longer than she had been alive. Elena raised her phone, the flashlight beam cutting into the darkness beyond. The room was small, perhaps 12 feet square, and it was filled with things that had no business being in a residential basement. File cabinets, 4 of them, lined the left wall, their metal surfaces spotted with rust but still intact. A wooden desk sat against the far wall, its surface covered with papers and folders that had yellowed with age but remained eerily pristine, as if someone had simply stood up mid-work and walked away, intending to return in just a moment. Along the right wall were wooden crates, stacked 2 high, each one stenciled with block letters that made Elena's blood run cold. U.S. War Department, Classified Material, 1942. Her journalist's instincts kicked in before her fear could paralyze her. She stepped into the room carefully, noting everything, her mind already cataloging details. The floor here was wooden, not concrete. The walls were lined with some kind of insulation material she didn't recognize. And there, in the corner, was something that looked almost like a ventilation system, a metal duct running up through the ceiling, probably venting to somewhere outside the house. This wasn't just a hidden room. This was a workspace. A laboratory, maybe, or a secure office. Someone had spent serious money and effort creating this space, and even more effort hiding it. Elena moved to the desk first. The papers scattered across its surface were covered in typewritten text, dense paragraphs punctuated with official-looking stamps, confidential. Eyes only. Project Nightingale. She picked up the top document carefully, the paper brittle under her fingers, and began to read. Subject Screening Report, December 7, 1942. Project Nightingale. Facility, Site 7, Civilian Auxiliary. Subjects processed this week, 8. Subjects approved for Phase 2, 3. Subjects terminated, 5. Elena's hands began to shake. Subjects terminated. The clinical language couldn't disguise what she was reading. These were people. And they had been killed. She set the paper down and picked up another. This one was a medical report, dense with terminology she didn't fully understand, but the gist was clear enough: experimental drug trials, administered without consent, resulting in adverse reactions that included seizures, organ failure, and death. She moved to the filing cabinets, her movements mechanical now, her mind refusing to fully process what she was uncovering. The first drawer was stuck, but she wrenched it open, the metal screaming in protest. Inside were manila folders, dozens of them, each labeled with a number and a name. Subject 04, Kowalski, Stefan. Subject 11, Martinez, Rosa. Subject 19, Chen, Margaret. Elena pulled out the first file. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, but clear enough. A young man, maybe 25 years old, sitting in what looked like a hospital bed. His eyes were hollow, exhausted. The next photo showed him strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to his temples, his mouth open in what could only be a scream. The final photo in the series showed him lying on a gurney, his eyes closed, his face slack. Across the bottom, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Subject expired 14:23 hours. Cause: cardiac arrest following administration of compound 7B." Elena dropped the file and backed away from the cabinet, her breath coming in short gasps. This was real. This had happened. In this house, or somewhere connected to this house, people had been experimented on. Tortured. Murdered. And someone had documented it all with the cold efficiency of a butcher tallying livestock. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think like a journalist instead of a terrified woman standing in a tomb of secrets. She needed to document everything. She needed evidence. Because if she walked out of this room and tried to tell anyone what she had found without proof, they would think she was insane. Elena began photographing everything. Every document on the desk. Every file in the cabinet. She moved methodically, her phone's camera clicking over and over, capturing the horror in megapixels and metadata. She photographed the crates along the wall, though she didn't dare open them yet. Whatever was inside had been sealed for 80 years. It could wait another hour. She was photographing the ventilation system when she noticed something tucked behind one of the ducts. A small wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, pushed back into the shadows. Elena pulled it out carefully and opened it. Inside was a stack of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a leather journal, its cover cracked and worn. Elena untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was written in elegant cursive on personal stationery, dated December 15, 1942. My dearest Catherine. I am writing this in the only place I believe is safe, your basement, behind the wall we built together. You asked me why I insisted on helping with the renovation, why I spent so many evenings down here when I should have been home with my wife. Now you know. I could not tell you before. I could not risk your safety by burdening you with the truth. But if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. It means they have silenced me, as they have silenced others who tried to resist. The work I have been doing for the War Department is not what I was told it would be. They recruited me from the university, promising that my research would save soldiers' lives, that we would develop medicines and treatments to combat diseases on the front lines. But Catherine, what I have seen in these past 6 months has shaken me to my core. We are not helping soldiers. We are experimenting on civilians. Immigrants who cannot speak English well enough to protest. Drifters no one will miss. People the government has deemed expendable in the name of national security. I have documented everything. Every test, every subject, every death. It is all here, in these files, in this room. I know the risks. I know that possessing this evidence makes me a traitor in their eyes. But I cannot stand by while atrocities are committed in the name of science. If something happens to me, you must find someone who can expose this. Someone who cannot be bought or threatened. Someone who will have the courage I have lacked. The project is being relocated. They are closing this facility and moving the research to a more secure location in the Midwest. But I have kept copies of everything. They are here, behind this wall, in the safest place I know, your home, where they would never think to look. I pray you never have to read this. I pray I am simply being paranoid, that I will be able to destroy these words and pretend none of this ever happened. But if the worst comes to pass, remember that I loved you as a sister. And please, please, do not let my death be meaningless. Your brother, Jonathan Ashford. Elena's vision blurred with tears. Jonathan Ashford. Her great-uncle. The man in the faded photographs on Aunt Josephine's mantel, always in his suit and tie, looking serious and scholarly. The family story was that he had died in a car accident in 1943. A tragedy. A loss. But this letter told a different story. He hadn't died in an accident. He had been murdered. Silenced because he had tried to do the right thing. And Aunt Josephine, Catherine, as he had called her, had lived in this house for over 50 years, knowing what was hidden in her basement. Had she read these letters? Had she known about the experiments, the deaths, the conspiracy? Or had she simply sealed the door and tried to forget, too frightened to act, too burdened to speak? Elena carefully placed the letter back in the box and picked up the journal. The first entry was dated September 1942, written in the same elegant handwriting. September 14, 1942. Today I began work at the facility they are calling Site 7. It is not what I expected. The building is nondescript, hidden in an industrial district where no one asks questions about trucks coming and going at odd hours. Inside, it is sterile and cold, more prison than laboratory. They showed me the subjects today. 12 of them, kept in cells in the basement. They told me these were volunteers, people who had agreed to participate in exchange for money and medical care. But the fear in their eyes told a different story. These people do not know what they have agreed to. And I suspect many of them did not agree at all. Elena flipped through the journal, reading entries that grew progressively more desperate, more horrified. Jonathan Ashford had documented everything, the drugs they tested, the procedures they performed, the subjects who died screaming or convulsing or simply fading away as their organs shut down one by one. He had tried to report it through proper channels. He had been warned. Then threatened. Then, finally, he had decided to gather evidence, to create a record that could not be destroyed or denied. The final entry was dated December 20th, 1942. They know. I don't know how, but they know I have been keeping records. 2 men came to my office today, not scientists, not military. Something else. They did not threaten me directly. They simply asked questions about my family. About Catherine. About where she lives, who visits her, whether she lives alone. I understood the message. I have hidden everything I could. The rest, I will destroy. If I disappear, perhaps they will believe the evidence is gone. Perhaps they will leave Catherine alone. I do not have the courage of a hero. I wish I did. But I cannot let my sister pay for my choices. If anyone ever reads this, please. Do not let them win. Do not let them bury the truth forever. Ja. 3 days later, according to the family records, Jonathan Ashford had died in a car accident on a rural road outside Philadelphia. Single vehicle crash. No witnesses. The police had ruled it an accident. Elena sat on the dusty floor of that hidden room, surrounded by evidence of crimes that had been committed in the name of national security, and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Her great-uncle had tried to expose this. It had gotten him killed. And her aunt had spent the rest of her life living above this tomb of secrets, too frightened to speak, perhaps hoping that time would somehow make it right, or at least make it forgotten. But time had only buried it deeper. Elena looked around the room, at the files and the crates and the damning documents spread across that old desk, and realized that she now carried the same burden Jonathan Ashford had carried 80 years ago. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And she had a choice: seal the door again, pretend she had never found it, and live with the weight of that silence. Or do what her great-uncle had tried to do, and risk whatever consequences came with exposing a conspiracy that powerful people had killed to protect. She thought about her career as a journalist, how it had stalled because she had always been too cautious, too willing to kill stories that might make powerful people uncomfortable. She thought about her divorce, how her ex-husband had accused her of never standing up for anything that mattered. She thought about Aunt Josephine, who had carried this secret to her grave, and wondered if the weight of it had slowly crushed the life out of her. Elena stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting on the cold floor. She gathered the letters in the journal and tucked them carefully into her bag. Then she began photographing everything else, every file, every document, every piece of evidence in that room. She worked for 3 hours straight, her phone's battery draining steadily, until she had documented everything. When she finally climbed back up the basement stairs, the sun was setting, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and red. She stood there in the ordinary warmth of early evening, feeling like she had just surfaced from deep water, her lungs burning, her mind reeling. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Marissa: "Wine night? I'm buying." Elena stared at the message, at the casual normalcy of it, and felt the distance between her world and everyone else's yawn open like a chasm. She couldn't tell Marissa. Not yet. Not until she understood what she was dealing with. Not until she figured out who she could trust. Because if people had been willing to kill Jonathan Ashford to keep this secret in 1942, Elena had no reason to believe they wouldn't be willing to kill again in 2025. She looked back toward the basement door, and for the first time since Aunt Josephine's death, she understood why the old woman had seemed so haunted in her final years. Why she had gripped Elena's hand at the end and whispered, "Some doors should stay closed, sweetheart. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." But it was too late for that now. Elena had opened the door. And she couldn't close it again, even if she wanted to. She didn't know it yet, but opening that door had triggered something. Somewhere in a nondescript office building, an algorithm had flagged an anomaly. Security systems that had been dormant for decades had activated. And people whose job it was to protect secrets that were never supposed to see daylight had received an alert. They knew she had found the room. And they were already deciding what to do about it. Elena Hartwell discovered a sealed room in her basement containing evidence of government experiments from 1942. Her great-uncle Jonathan Ashford had documented atrocities committed under Project Nightingale, human experiments that resulted in dozens of deaths. He had hidden the evidence before his suspicious death. Now, 80 years later, Elena held the truth in her hands. But she was about to learn that some secrets never die, they just wait for the right moment to strike back. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with Jonathan's journal open in front of her, reading his entries by lamplight. Every word confirmed what the documents showed. Project Nightingale had been a covert operation to test experimental drugs on unwilling subjects, immigrants, the homeless, anyone society wouldn't miss. The official story was medical advances for the war effort. The reality was human experimentation that violated every ethical boundary. At 3 a.m, Elena's phone buzzed. An email from an address she didn't recognize, email protected. No subject line. She hesitated, then opened it. Ms. Hartwell, we know what you found. We know you've been documenting it. This is not a threat, it's a courtesy warning. Some historical matters are best left undisturbed. For your own safety, we strongly recommend you seal the room and forget what you've seen. You have 48 hours to comply. Elena's blood turned to ice. They knew. Already. She had been in that room for just hours, and somehow, someone knew. Her hands shaking, she forwarded the email to backup accounts, then began uploading every photo to an encrypted cloud service. By dawn, Elena had made her decision. She texted Dr. Marcus Webb, her former journalism professor and now senior investigative reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, need to meet. Have something big. In person only. Today. His response came within minutes, usual place. 10 a.m. Elena arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, scanning the street. Marcus showed up exactly on time, his expression serious the moment he saw her face. She slid her phone across the table, showing him photographs from the basement. Marcus's eyes widened as he scrolled through the images. When he reached the photograph of the young man strapped to a chair with electrodes attached to his head, he set the phone down and looked at Elena with genuine fear. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "My aunt's basement. Hidden since 1942. My great-uncle documented everything before they killed him." "Elena, do you understand what you're holding? If this program existed, if it was sanctioned at high levels, there are institutions that would do anything to keep it buried. I got an email this morning." She showed him the warning. Marcus read it twice, his jaw tightening. "They're not bluffing. You need to be very careful." "I'm not pretending this never happened," Elena said firmly. "These people deserve justice. Then we need corroboration. Other sources. We can't just publish classified documents without verification." Elena pulled out Jonathan's journal. He mentions Dr. Catherine Morrison. She worked at Site 7 with him. If she's still alive, she could verify everything. Marcus nodded. "I'll locate her. But you need to move that evidence somewhere safe. Not your house. I'll rent a safety deposit box today." They parted ways, Marcus promising to call with any leads. Elena went directly to a bank across town and rented a safety deposit box under a false name, transferring all physical documents there. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then, on the third morning, she woke to find her front door standing open. She knew she had locked it. Elena grabbed her phone and backed toward the rear exit, calling 911. The police found nothing missing, no signs of forced entry. But Elena knew better. This was a message: "We can reach you whenever we want." That afternoon, Marcus called. "I found Dr. Catherine Morrison. She's 89, living in a nursing facility in Wilmington. She agreed to meet." Elena drove to Wilmington the next day, constantly checking her rearview mirror. Dr. Morrison was waiting in the common room, a small woman with sharp eyes and trembling hands. "You look like Jonathan," she said as Elena sat down. "Same eyes. He was a good man." "You knew what was happening at Site 7? Elena asked gently. Dr. Morrison nodded. We all knew. But speaking against it meant being labeled a traitor during wartime. Jonathan tried. He gathered evidence, planned to go to the press. Then one day he didn't come to work. A week later, we heard about the car accident. It wasn't an accident, was it? No, dear. It wasn't. Dr. Morrison's eyes filled with tears. I've lived with that guilt for 80 years. I should have helped him. You can help now, Elena said. I need someone who was there to confirm it's real. Dr. Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll testify. I'm 89 years old. What can they do to me now? She smiled sadly. Perhaps it's time to finally tell the truth. Elena recorded a 2-hour interview with Dr. Morrison, capturing every detail about Site 7, the experiments, the subjects, and the researchers. It was damning testimony that corroborated everything in Jonathan's documents. Marcus spent the next week verifying facts, tracking down descendants of victims, building the story. Then, 1 week before publication, 2 men in dark suits visited his office. Federal credentials, polite but firm. They explained that certain historical matters were classified for national security reasons. That publishing would violate the Espionage Act. Marcus called Elena immediately. They're threatening an injunction. Can they do that? They can try. But I've already sent the story to 3 other journalists at major outlets. If they block us, it goes out elsewhere. They can't stop everyone. The story ran on a Sunday morning, front page, Project Nightingale, government experiments on civilians exposed after 80 years. The response was immediate. Within hours, descendants of victims came forward. More witnesses emerged, people who had worked at other sites. The story went viral, picked up by national and international media. The government issued denials, claiming forgeries. But Dr. Morrison's testimony, combined with death certificates, military records, and Jonathan's documentation, made the denials hollow. Congressional hearings were called. Lawsuits filed. Apologies issued. 6 months later, the government acknowledged that Project Nightingale had existed, that experiments had been conducted without proper consent, and that victims deserved compensation and recognition. Elena stood in the cemetery where Jonathan Ashford was buried. Someone had placed fresh flowers on his headstone, probably a descendant who had learned the truth. You weren't a coward, Elena said softly. You were just ahead of your time. But we finished what you started. She thought about Aunt Josephine, about the burden she had carried in silence. Perhaps leaving the house to Elena had been her way of finally letting go of the secret. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, new lead on a related project. Codename Mockingbird. Interested? She smiled. The past had more secrets waiting. And now, she knew she had the courage to find them. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it waits for the right person to uncover it. Elena Hartwell found more than hidden documents, she found justice for the voiceless victims of Project Nightingale. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible mysteries. Leave a comment telling us what historical secret you think deserves to be uncovered. Your support means everything. Remember, the truth is worth fighting for, no matter how long it's been buried.